Triodos. We have some people with mics. If you could use the mics, because this is quite a large room, and let's get going. Let's have a few questions. Okay, so one here in the front.
David G. From the European Environment Agency, previous Director of Friends of the Earth here. The question is, what lies in the gap between knowledge and action in this field, given that there is so much knowledge about this field? Arrhenius in 1896 spelt out the physical basis of the externalities from climate change by showing that if you double CO2 in the atmosphere, the global temperature will rise by about 3 or 4 degrees C. We've gained a lot of precision since then, little action. So, secondly, the paper from Pretty in 1990 spelled out the externalities of agriculture. In 1999, in 1990 at Friends of the Earth, I commissioned the Institute of Fiscal Studies in the UK to model the increase in the price of food by 20%, energy 20%, transport by 20%, work out the equity implications, which are severe, and then work out the policy measures to restore equity, in fact, to improve equity. That was available. We've produced 5 reports on the externalities of energy, water, and food in the last 15 years at the agency. The action is difficult. One suggestion to help the answer is, yesterday at the big meeting in Europe, Parliament, organized by PAN on pesticide-free food for Europe, the externalities question came up because I put it there. Half the panel and nearly all of the audience just didn't understand what it's about. So we need something to fill the gap between knowledge and action. The Canadians for the energy field gave us the phrase, tax what you burn and not what you earn, which is the essence of the tax shift for energy. You need something like that in agriculture. Some more hints would be nice. Thank you.
Thank you. Super question. A little bit long, but super question. Thank you very much. So hold that question, folks. Let's maybe go back here, the lady there.
Hi. Thank you. I'm Leemarin. I'm a small farmer. I run Agri-Living in New York. I'd like to hear Professor Silver defend why we need to sequester carbon through grasslands and why that's not about eating more meat. It would actually be eating less meat.
Okay. If you can sort of signal so I can see. We have one here. Sorry, there's bright lights in my eyes, so it's good to give me a good wave.
Leo Trisani, New York University. I just have a comment in that, well, I agree that with Professor Ford's point that the externalities for food are quite large. I think we have to be careful about teasing apart the data to date about what the attribution within those large health externalities are. I mean, there's an emerging evidence that chemical factors may play significant roles in contributing to human health and disease and carry costs. And I think it's important to disaggregate all of those factors because ultimately the solutions will cut off various components of those costs. I mean, I think to date, one of the issues that I have with the nutritional epidemiology literature is they've shined the flashlight on diet when they've not actually measured other coexisting factors that may otherwise explain the effects on health. So thank you.
So it's the gap between the nutrient effects and the chemicals that are also in those foods, and we're conflating these. So let's take this one here.
Thank you. I'm Sheriff in Gardner, and I represent something called Scialabba International on the UK Food Group. 2 questions, really. I'd love to hear comments on the different emphasis between the Foresight Report and the IAASTD, the International Assessment of Agricultural Technology and Development. And I would love to hear something about the concept of food sovereignty and also the possible role of Via Campesina, which represents thousands and thousands of small farmers. Thank you.
Thank you. And then the lady at there.
Whereabouts, sorry? Hi, I'm Tracy Worcester from Farms Not Factories. We have a campaign called the Pig Ask. And I was wondering how much money is actually going out there to get the information and all the research that's been done for many years about the problems, to get the public on board, to get the message out to them. So we've been making films, and now our pig ask is to ask the public to pledge to, hang on a minute, panic. Okay, so avoid factory farmed meat, and if they can't afford high welfare labels, to reduce their meat consumption or shop at their farmer's market. Now, there are messages out there. Can you tell me about what you're doing on the platform to get those messages and get the public on board? Because I think they're ready.
Thank you. Great question about public engagement. Let's pause now and have similarly pithy responses from, not necessarily on every question from every panelist, but to some of these things. Who would like to start? Jules?
Yeah, should I just pick up one thing? We've talked a lot about the importance of different capitals, natural capital, the gap between the financial and the natural importance. We haven't actually mentioned the social capital component, and it's quite clear that from the evidence that the substantial increases, that small glass that increased to larger in developing countries, has come through farmers being organized and working together. So the creation of the social capital, the example that you gave there, absolutely that's what's needed. And in my mind, the bigger question, the first one, the gap between the knowledge and action, it has to center on the creation of different forms of social capital in order to tell the story that Tracy was just talking about. You need to create social capital and then have a kind of an element of storytelling. I mean, numbers are stories. Yes. That's all we do, is we create stories, and you hope they'll have some salience and grip, and then have the opportunity to spread further.
I think this is really key because the public has been overwhelmed by distorted and contradictory messages about these things, and without social capital, they won't know what to believe, they won't know how to be engaged in a process of discovery that they can then reliably use. Tim, I think.
Yes.
Whendee, do you want to?
I'm not mic'd up. Can I use this? Yeah.
Yes.
Let me try and weave, echoing and building on what Jules has just said. Essentially the picture in public health is very clear. The burden is already very high on us in the rich countries, but I don't know if you noticed in one of my slides, basically the low and particularly the middle income countries are catching up, and the burden there from dietary inadequacies, in other words, consuming like us, is going to be massive. It's going to be much bigger than us. So there's a huge incentive. That's why the World Bank, World Economic Forum, all these people I was citing are getting interested, because these countries haven't got healthcare systems. We can barely afford the healthcare systems, and they can't. It's a model that's broken. That's one message, actually, to policymakers who won't get it. There's a public messaging that a lot of the talkers were asking for, but I think this is sort of an inside track messaging that we're not doing well enough at the moment. On the issue of meat, it actually a lot comes down. If I have 20 seconds, I say it's about what sort of meat we eat, and it's how it's fed, and whether it's grass-fed and grasslands so capturing carbon, or whether we're eating horticultural outputs. Horticulture, not agriculture, is what's good for public health. And we don't really know what good, sustainable horticulture looks like. But when it comes to the public, and I am really stark, I have a PhD in psychology, I speak as a social scientist now, with absolute venom. We have a really tricky message here, which is we want food to be expensive. The public and the world has made food and wants and sees cheap food as a good thing. And that is an absolute, not just a knowledge gap, it's a message gap. Who in the world wants to say, I'm prepared to double the price that I spend on food, when in fact progress has been defined in the 20th century as lowering the price of food so that it's less of a burden on the indignity of life. And getting cheaper food means poor people buy more and therefore live longer initially. So it's a really, really difficult message. So saying we want more expensive food is not a good message. What we've got to say is the advantages of eating differently to how the West is doing is the thing to aspire to. And that's less but better meat, much less frequently, only when it's got a low environmental impact, and huge amounts of plant-based foods, more fruit growing than animal growing. So that
Okay,
is
Tim,
a
I'm going
tricky
to-
message,
Okay, Whendee.
but it's a cultural message, and we haven't got our heads around it. To
So,
answer Dave's point.
Yeah.
my mic is on. So I just want to, and I want to build on that and address the question about why does this not necessarily mean more meat? And it's for a couple of reasons. First of all, our grasslands aren't only used for meat production. They're used for dairy production and fiber production and many other important products that we use globally. So we absolutely need grazing lands and livestock for our well-being. They're very useful, very important. We went through and interviewed ranchers in several regions of the U.S. and said, if you were able to grow more grass through better management, would you increase your herd size? Which is not only bad for more meat, it making meat more available, but also has a negative feedback on the climate because cows are a big emitter of methane. And they uniformly said no. What we want is to not increase our herd size. We want to get paid more and have to work less for the animals and the animal products that we sell. And so I think by moving out of a factory farm kind of environment to having more sustainable land use and longer land use, getting more out of that land, in many ways allows you to produce. It may even lower the cost for farmers, which means that we've got to play with that costing. The other comment I want to make very briefly about messaging and how to get this message out is just a plea to all of you, and I've been making pleas to fellow scientists about communicating their results more broadly, is that every single person in this room is a communicator. And it doesn't matter if you're sitting next to somebody on a bus or on a plane, or we always make the joke of Thanksgiving dinner, because in the US I sit next to family members who, from the other side of the country, who are on the very other side of the political spectrum. And I have to tell them about climate change, and I have to tell them about their food. And I really do have to do that. And every single one of you has to do that too. And if that multiplies out by 10, 20, 30, in some cases some of you have a much further reach, then that message gets out. So you all have a responsibility, and I think together we can really make a difference.
Thanks, Whendee. I think we should also add in response to your question earlier that many both indigenous agroecological systems, but also much innovation in this area can involve ways that you link animal production processes with horticultural and agricultural processes that can have positive feedbacks, and that's worth mentioning too. Peter, a quick...
Well, going back to the theme of the conference, through price accounting, I think there are some pitfalls and some opportunities. If we use it in mass marketing, it will not work.
Yeah.
Price in itself is not selling it. The value is different. You have to focus on the value if you look at mass marketing.
Yeah.
Where it can work very well is in discussions with insurance companies, governments, to create even a finance mechanism. And I've been talking the last 2 days about social impact finance. There's a lot of interest in social impact finance. How can we allocate money from the private market to have some of these huge costs, sort of make programs to work that? And I think the whole food and agriculture should fit into that. Otherwise we are losing something. But governments will not directly subsidize it anymore. They will see a business case almost that it can work. It sounds a little bit like, oh, we are all now in the market, but probably there the whole true cost price accounting can work, but not for your message to the main public. That is not going to work.
One of the, obviously the results of these kinds of true cost accounting investigations is that you can identify where governments or citizens are already paying very significant amounts of money, that then you can persuade either civil society or government to reallocate those money or reallocate even these perverse subsidies.
You can make a healthcare.
Yeah.
We pay for healthcare. Yeah. That's actually the message to get to people. In human terms, it becomes, do you want your children to live longer than you? Those are very powerful appeals.
Yes.
And frankly, we've not been doing that.
And the price of a courgette compared to the price of a 6 months intensive treatment is a little more favorable. A quick comment from Nadia, and we'll have a couple of last questions.
Yes. I've been struggling now 15 years now in FAO trying to document best case studies on organic agriculture. It's not working. I mean, we have the messaging, we have the case studies. The reality between knowledge and policy decision making, there's a huge gap, which is the comment here. And it will continue to be so. The political decisions are not made on that basis. I think where we're missing something here is that we should make those economic costs more visible in the short term. For example, climate change. We talked a lot about climate change 20 years ago in FAO since '89. Nobody was listening. But then when you start having major catastrophic events and it was becoming immediate, people started thinking that there is a climate change impact. Health, it's the same. I mean, I tell my children, too much meat is not good for liver cancer, for example. We have evidence on this. It's in 20 years. They're not going to listen. And I think the ability to translate these costs into short-term actions which are actionable by policymakers because they're accountable to the whole population. In the UK a few years ago, only 7% of consumers were buying 70% of the organic produce on the market. So we're talking about an elite. But policymakers are not working only for that elite, which is us and our friends, but it's 100% of the population. And I think this is the challenge. I mean, how we can translate this into something actionable now. And it can be done when you show certain losses in the economy, in the national economy, in health and other things, then you have more chances to do so.
Super. 3 or 4 more comments, questions from the floor. One at the front here.
Dan Crossley from the Food Ethics Council. It's a question building on a previous question about engagement. How can we engage with the major food businesses who are making a lot of money at the moment from the drive for cheap food? And out of interest, are there any major food businesses represented in the room or that are willing to put their hand up? And I think that's a no. So, or very few. But so, the point is, how do we engage that big section of the industry, and how do we get beyond vested interests?
So before we go to the next question, let's just have Patrick make a quick, mic back please, for Patrick to make a quick comment on the presence or absence of food companies.
I think Dan's question is very important for me to answer because we asked a lot of food businesses if they would come, including major retailers, at chief executive level, if they would come and participate in the panels, and we were not successful. And I want to just do a corollary to that, which is to connect with what Whendee said about media engagement. This is a story against our cause, but I think I'm feeling so optimistic I'm risking sharing it with you. Of course, we went to Farming Today, and we said, look, we've got a world conference here on one of the most important issues of our time on true cost accounting and food and farming. Perhaps you might cover it today. And for those early birds who listened to the Farming Today program at 5:45 this morning, you heard that they made a decision. The export of chicken's feet from Moy Park in Northern Ireland to China took precedence over this story about true cost accounting. So the media have been drinking the Kool-Aid as well. So there are some media here, but we have a really major challenge to get these messages across in a way which touches them.
Thank you. We had a question there. Can we get a mic too? Oh, I think I just... Oh, can we even get a mic to the balcony?
Yeah, hello. Is that working? I'm Martin Peck, a small organic hill farmer. I wanted to, maybe particularly to Nadia, and bring it back to IAS STD question. Some of the problem on food pricing, in order to produce the increases of food, we've had to displace many indigenous peoples at all different levels of development in order that they can no longer produce their own food, which accounts for a lot of poverty. So it's something like that I would like comments on. Thank you.
Great question. I think we're sending a mic to the upstairs. Yes, we have. Look at this. What a team.
Colin Tudge from the Campaign for Real Farming.
Oh, hello, Colin.
Especially in the light of Dr. Scialabba's comments, I'd like to ask Jules Pretty why nobody seems to take seriously the comments of Hans Herren in the IASDD report that was cited earlier, that the world already produces enough food for 14 billion people, in other words, twice the present population, and 50% more than the world population is ever supposed to reach. Now, I agree with you entirely that raising the output of the small farms, half a ton a hectare and all that, half a ton a hectare and all that kind of stuff, is necessary. Also often commented that the way to do that is by logistic means rather than by, for example, high-tech means. But the idea that we should be trying to increase yet further the 8 tons per hectare that we've got in Britain seems to me ludicrous. And it seems to me that if we go on, we have to recognize the principle of enough's enough, and we've already got enough. And unless we recognize the principle of enough's enough, then we're never going to have sustainability. It becomes a nonsense.
So thank you. So I think we're going to have to stop the questions, and I don't know how much time we're going to have for responses. I'm going to abuse my position to respond a little bit to the comment back down here. One, it seems to me a useful unintended consequence, if you like, of this kind of true cost accounting is that it often identifies the scale of the financial incentives that are driving the system in wrong directions. And as we understand the scale of those financial incentives, we will also understand why the current broken system is so resilient, why it's been so difficult to use logic, argument, political mobilization, innovation, all kinds of ideas. We can't seem to break the current system, and when there are efforts to persuade the public otherwise, they are very quickly outspent by those who have an interest in the current system. And that's because of the size and shape of these financial distortions, direct and indirect subsidies, of keeping it as it is. So strategically, it seems to me that we need to do a number of things. One is that we can use this information both to strategize ourselves about what is more likely to be changeable than others and how we can unravel this. We can use this to explain to publics, but also we can use this to find allies in the food production and food industry who are not dependent or even would like to see changes in these distortions because they are making their own business models difficult. So we can find allies as well. These are all probably things we need to do so that because if it's us versus people with that level of financial interest, they're not going, they'd be crazy to give it up easily, and they're not crazy as we've discovered, even though we might have thought differently. So a couple of quick last comments from panel and Jules.
Can I just pick up Colin's point, because I think there's quite something important there. Of course we produce enough food now. We produce 700 kilograms of plant food per person per year. We need about 250, maybe 300 if we're very hungry. What do we do with the gap? We burn a lot. We turn it into ethanol. We feed a lot to animals. We waste a lot. So it's not actually, so of course we produce enough. It's in the wrong places, and my point about using the glasses here was that the challenge is not to increase the 8 tons per hectare, but to look at the 2.5 billion people who rely on agricultural systems close to where they live or where they live, where the yields are half a ton per hectare. That needs to increase. Absolutely, that needs to increase. Otherwise, we end up creating systems that are anti the poor, anti the hungry. In the long term, you would hope for convergence and for settling down, and you wouldn't need to be pushing the productivity, but at the moment we have 1 billion people hungry. So I think it's important that we just kind of understand that, of course, enough is enough, but it depends on where you sit in the world at the moment. At the moment. 50 years' time?
One other
Maybe
person, Tim, then. Sorry.
Can I deal with the companies?
Make it short, though, Tim.
Yeah, very short. The answer is companies are nervous at the moment. They are shaken by the commodity price spike of 2007-8, that all the prognoses said the long drift of prices to drop would carry on. It has not. Prices have gone up and continue to be volatile, and that's the new normality. We actually, if you want to engage with companies, that is the point of engagement. They are deeply nervous because essentially the fight that's gone on is whether farmers get the money processors get the money or retailers get the money, and most importantly now, caterers get the money. That is the dynamic that no one talks about, and that is the one that interests me. If you want to get engagement with companies, it's all around their commodity price volatility at the moment. And I can tell you companies, my centre, my colleagues, we take no money from food companies. We're known as critics. I get asked all the time now to go and talk to the biggest companies in the world, because for the first time they are now deeply, deeply nervous that ecosystems are coming to hit them. But it's the cost rise that has got their attention.
And the volatility rise. And this point was made very clearly by speakers as well who work with businesses, the Team for Business and the A4S
they're
groups.
worried about consumers having to pay more for food. That is the really tricky bit. Prices are now going up. What they're doing is they're reformulating and cutting product size, which in public health terms might actually be quite good. But they know it's going to go on, and that requires behavior change. I quote always one of the biggest food companies in the world, which said to me, we can shave carbon, we can shave water for a bit, you'll see less plastic in your Coca-Cola bottle. That's happening. But in 10 years' time, there has to be massive consumer change.
So Professor Lang is also shaving your coffee break so that you'll be less impacted by caffeine or anything else. But
high water, high embedded carbon.
okay. So, fabulous beginning, wonderful questions.